We're joined now in the studio by Steve Hynes, Director of the Legal Action Group, and from Westminster by the Justice Minister, Hynes-v-Janogly. Minister, can you really, hand on heart, say that justice will not be affected by these measures today?
Well, justice will not be affected, no, not necessarily. The fact of the matter is that we have a 2.2 billion spend on legal aid. It has doubled in the last 20 years. We spend by far more than most other countries in the world. And the reality is that even after these proposed savings, we will still be spending more than any other country in the world.
Steve Hynes, that sounds a rather robust defence of the measures.
Well, access to justice will be affected quite starkly. You've heard in that piece, 500,000 people will lose entitlement, and that's the bulk of that is going to be in what we call social welfare law. For example, in benefits, there'll be over 100,000 people will no longer be able to get advice. So it's quite a profound effect.
Advice or bring a case?
Or bring a case. At the moment in benefits, you only can get advice. You don't get representation before the tribunal. But also...
Well, let's just get a picture from the Minister as to... I mean, it is an interesting thing that this coincides with the moment when the welfare system itself is going to go through a revolution, and in that moment it seems that you're going to cut the opportunity for the very poor, for example, to make application for legal aid to have whatever is done reviewed.
Well, that depends. If they were going to go to court with legal aid, that might be the case. However, for many people, it's not a question of going to court. And indeed, we think too many people are wanting to go to court. For many people, it's getting basic advice, often of a mechanical or administrative nature, from, for instance, their local CAB or from a voluntary organisation on how to get their benefits, or indeed going to their MP's office. So you can't just say that cutting legal aid is going to remove access to justice.
Well,
if you say that justice is purely related to legal aid, yes, we're going to be spending less on legal aid, but there are many aspects of our savings where we think it won't just be a question of cuts, but it will provide an impetus and an urgency for reform.
Well, that's an interesting, because I think I've heard a ministerial moment in which you move from the administration of justice into the big society, into CABs, NGOs and the rest of it, who will pick up the pieces. Is that right?
Well, not necessarily. In some cases, we think in administrative law tribunals, which were not originally meant for legal representation, but over the years legal representation has slipped into them. That should now be pulled back, and they should go back to what they were originally intended for. And in other ways, we think that legal representation is simply not suited, particularly, for instance, in relation to private family law, divorce and ancillary processes, where we think mediation is often provides a better result than going to court.
Let's go to the practitioners then, because there are 2 points that the Minister's made. One is we spend far more than any other European country on legal aid in these sorts of cases, and two, you don't need to go to court anyway, and that a lot of you are persuading people to go to court who don't need to.
Well, two things to that. The Minister's own department last year published a report by Bowles and Perry. They're researchers at the University of York, and it demonstrated clearly that in other jurisdictions in Europe, when you take all of the costs of the legal system, including the court's costs, we came out similarly. We have an adversarial system, so that means a lot of the costs are loaded in representation. You need more judiciary, more court time in a non-adversarial system as you have in the European jurisdictions.
Yeah. Can I just address that point?
Yeah.
I mean, too often our system is too adversarial. Again, if you look at family law, where we're making the largest savings, too often people are prepared to put answering their problems into the hands of lawyers when they should take their own problems into their own hands and go down the mediation route. And perhaps we should be moving to a more inquisitorial type system rather than, again, just heading towards court.
Steve Hynes.
Well, it's undoubtedly the case that I don't think anybody argues that the bulk of family cases shouldn't be in courts, but that's the system we have now. What this will see is 200,000 people now not getting redress when things go wrong in terms of their relationships.
The Minister seems to be implying that what's actually going to happen is that it will force these people, instead of going to court, actually get the things sorted out without allowing these barristers to go off and charge large sums of money to the state.
It's putting the cart before the legislative horse. I think you can change family law, and there's a review at the moment on family law, so you would make it less adversarial, and we'd support that. But you can't cut away people's redress under the current system, and I think that's what's in danger of happening here.
Steve Hynes, Minister, thank you both very warmly for coming in.